Так, ми можемо починати, да?
Good afternoon, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. We are starting our press conference. The press conference is organized by the Free Crimea Center, the National Strategy Foundation, and UCMC. This press conference is dedicated to the blockage of Crimea, and it's called Hunger Games in Crimea. I would like to give the word to Serhiy Taran, political expert, and Serhiy Gromenko, who's Crimean historian fellow at Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. And I'm Berezovets, who is the moderator of all the projects Free Crimea. On behalf of our center, I would like to congratulate all the Muslims of Ukraine with the great festival Kurban Bayram. Especially I would like to congratulate my friends from Crimea. We congratulate you with this holiday, and we wish Allah to give you peace and quietness in our dear Crimea. Now we'll be talking about the blockage that the Ukrainian activists, together with the leaders of Crimean Tatar people, organized at the administrative border. The word border is the one that not everyone likes, but at the administrative line between the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Ukrainian Kherson Oblast. You know that in the nearest days the General Assembly of UN will be open, and the blockade that was organized allowed to return Crimea to the agenda of the global policy and Ukrainian policy. Unfortunately, Ukrainian politicians started to forget about Crimea. Unfortunately, during the Independence Day, the Crimea wasn't even mentioned in a single speech of our senior leaders of the country. I don't know whether that was done by mistake or with purpose, I don't know, but our guest and myself will be talking today about how blockage of Crimea will have, what consequences it may have, and will it be continued. The blockade that was started became the response to ignoring the topic of Crimea but Ukrainian authorities, and it became the source of large-scale corruption that is still in the border service, because the trucks that take the food to the territory of occupied Crimea, they don't always have the final consumer on the territory of Crimea, but very often they are then transported via Kerch to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other Russian cities. The official figure of trade is $475 million, and that is only food products that from the beginning of 2015 were supplied to Crimea, but the realistic volumes, no one knows what they are. We believe they are the volumes are about $800 million. Both Ukrainian representatives, law enforcement bodies, and the separatists have business together, and they get enriched on that. And this situation is not is very bad, and it's good that the situation starts to change. Whether this blockade will continue, how long will it continue, it all depends on how much Ukraine and the government are ready to informally support this action. We understand that the volunteers can stand there for a month, 2 months, but further actions are possible only in coordination, informal coordination with official Ukrainian authorities. Finally, Ukraine has taken up initiative and is conducting the hybrid war. It's a reflection of Russian technologies, like Russia was saying that there are no Russian troops here, and that is the self-defense of Crimea. Same way, Ukrainian authorities will be saying that there are no representatives of authorities. That is the self-defense of Kherson region and activists. We understand perfectly well that any blockage will be efficient if it is lasting and if it is combined. Why? Because the issue of supply of food products is important. Crimea depends on Ukraine a lot. They now reduced its dependence up to 60%. Now 60% are supplied from Ukraine and 40% from Russia, but the water and electricity are supplied just from Ukraine, and if the water or electricity are cut off, then this will be a big impact on, first of all, military part, and this aircraft carrier, if the light is cut off, will not be able to move anywhere. So basically, here I would like to give the floor to my colleague Serhiy Taran, so that he provides the international analysis, because he's the director of International Institute of Democracies. So please talk about international aspect. Talking about food blockade of Crimea is not is very bad for Russia, because all the attention of Russia is focused on Syria, because Putin has taken troops to Syria unexpectedly, and now it's very important for him to sell the troops to the world in such a way that he is believed to be a peacekeeper, and then he will not be an outcast at the international arena. He will go back to the world arena as a player. And now this food blockade of Crimea has started, and it is to be addressed. The problem for Putin is that he has no one to put claims against, because formally in Ukraine any events may happen, but that's not the position of the government. That's the position of activists. Such blockages very often take place in Europe, like the farmers come to Paris and they get rid of their milk, for example. They pour the milk into the ground, and now Putin should understand that the prices for food products will go up. And Taras, and not just Taras, was saying that Ukraine is reacting to hybrid war of Russia, to hybrid siege of Crimea. That's good, because that is the first time that Ukraine started attacking in Crimea. We were defending, talking about Crimea, now we are attacking. I mean, not Ukrainian government, but Ukrainian society. And for Putin, this is very uncomfortable, and he doesn't know how to come out of this situation. Then the worst thing will start if the food blockade of Crimea is successful. Then maybe there will be many activists who would like to blockade the movement, to block the movement of food products to Transnistria Republic. This may happen, and that is very important. That is not just international but domestic issue, because Transnistria has turned into the pocket of corruption, and in Ukrainian authorities 10, 15, 5 years ago, there was a whole class of civil servants who were very much interested in this illegal trade in laundering money from the budget, and it started to threaten Ukrainian national security, because we all the time are afraid that Russian troops may enter Ukraine via Transnistria. So maybe activists will start demanding to block Transnistria Republic, or if they shall less, then maybe there will be more active blockage of the occupied territories of Donbass. The authorities started fighting smuggling there now, and I believe that the situation is so tense, is very tense there. And for Putin, the question is how and who to put claims against. Putin would like to get in UN the status of a person who rules the world, who is the person with who it is important to come to agreement. But such things as food blockage of Crimea force him to justify himself, and so during the next General Assembly of UN, Putin had to basically talk about terrorism in Syria, but now he will have to reply on the issues with Crimea. And the civil activists, different civil organizations get united. You know that the representatives of the Crimean Tatars, the rights sector, and other organizations participate in this blockade. And it is very important that we have the international policy which is conducted by the society. This is something unique for Ukraine. That was like that before the revolution of dignity, when it was the government that was setting the tone to the international policy. But now this is all happening with active participation of the society, civil society. So I believe that the food blockage of Crimea is successful because it returned Crimea to the agenda of international negotiations. Now the UN General Assembly has a very complicated negotiations as to execution of Minsk agreements. Russia would like that Crimea is not discussed during Minsk negotiations, but now it's back on the agenda. It is important for Ukraine and also for international community, who gets concentrated on the problem of occupied territories, and sometimes they forget about Crimea, so that no one wants to forget about Crimea. For that, such actions are very important. And one more thing. The food blockage of Crimea will have an impact not just on Russia and the international community, but on Ukrainian authorities. First of all, on the parliament, because now there will be many initiatives in the parliament which will be addressed towards legislative initiatives related to the trading with Crimea, because it looks like everything is happening according to the law. There's some gray zone there, how the products get there. No one knows. The Crimea has some special economic status. It is like a gray zone from the point of view of legislation. I believe that during the next session of the parliament, the MPs will come up with initiatives which will change this status. There will be many initiatives so that the food blockade of Crimea is legalized, so that the trade in the gray zone stops, so that the zone is not gray anymore. Thank you, Serhiy. Now I would like to give the floor to the Crimean historian who knows history so well, to Serhiy Gromenko. Please provide comments on another aspect. We understand who we are dealing with Mr. Putin. And this is a very dangerous enemy. We would like to hear your forecast. What could be the reaction of Putin? Now Russia is reoriented towards Syria. Or maybe Putin, what will be the attitude of Putin to our citizens in Crimea and to Ukraine? Thank you, Taras. As any historian, I will start from history. And the food blockade of Crimea, luckily, is not a Ukrainian know-how of the 21st century. In 1918, Crimea and Ukraine were in the customs war between the government of Hetman Skarapatsky and government of Matvei Witskevich in Simferopol, and Crimea managed to survive without Ukrainian food products for more or less 3 months. Ukraine was also suffering from it. Ukrainian fruit disappeared from Crimean fruit disappeared from Ukrainian markets, but Ukraine wasn't allowing any food products to Crimea, and basically the process was controlled, and in the result the Crimean delegations that refused to negotiate about about Crimea becoming part of Ukraine, they finally agreed to that. At that time, Crimea wasn't supplied, there was no supply to Crimea from any other sources. Now we say that they get 40% of supplies from Russian Federation. We can forecast that such blockade should last at least 1.5 times longer. Winter is ahead. Winter of 2015-2016 will become for us decisive from the point of view whether this blockage had some sense. If we find out that it is not perfect, if the money open up some gray portal for transporting, and we will learn about that, or maybe the activists will not be patient enough to finalize the blockade, then it wasn't worth starting. If we manage to continue it during the whole winter, then we will see that Crimea cannot feed itself, and the people in Crimea will be unhappy. Economy is not just mathematics, it's psychology as well. Some Crimean suppliers and traders, probably even today when there's no economic effect, but they're probably raising prices to have some profit. And that is just the way the people are made. How will Putin react to that? We see from experience that there's no other instrument but becoming more rigid. This hasn't happened a single time in history that Russian authorities would agree to compromise with those who were protesting. Sometimes the Russians make some crazy things, like they were destroying the food products in front of the cameras instead of giving them to some orphanages. So I would like to say that there will be more pressure. The repressions inside Russia will be intensified in order to distract attention from what's happening at the administrative border. Or if we are talking about the reduction of resource base, they will more carefully select those who create troubles. Now in Russia, more than 10 of the 10 governors were deprived freedom, and same way we will see that in Crimea. We will see how the crisis and the dispute between the Sevastopol city head and the architect of Crimean Spring will be aggravated. There's nothing good in that in short term for people in Crimea, but possibly this is the least evil that Ukraine should commit to return Crimea on the agenda. So I'm sitting between two Serhiys, and I can make any wish now. My wish is for the blockade of Crimea to be effective, so that it strikes against Putin regime as much as possible. I know people who live there very well, and I believe that in any situation they will be expressing their dissatisfaction in the kitchen, but they will not protest openly. So now your questions. We have our friends from Crimea, and these are great journalists. The person with the name Aksionov, I don't know whether I should introduce myself.
My name is Inna Aksionova. So my question is, how do you estimate how legal, whether this blockade is legal, and why there is no official response from the leaders of the state? Public actions, NGOs' actions are legal in Ukraine. The problem is that the movement between continental Ukraine and Crimean Peninsula took place in so-called gray zone. This means that they are as if two parts of Ukraine, one of which is gray, and some movement between the regions of Ukraine is not illegal. But the problem is that Ukraine doesn't control what happens to those trucks outside the controlled area, in the gray area. So the citizens may require and may demand from the government to make this zone white. If we can see how trade union, NGOs protect their rights, different advocacy organizations, human rights organizations, they are much more radical than this blocking. This blockade is even delayed. It is absolutely legal. Well, I think there are no grounds to say that something does contradict the law. So I think that we need to have legislative initiatives in the Verkhovna Rada to strictly control the movement between Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula. Thank you for the answer. I think that Ukrainian government will not comment anything with this blockade, so that and what about Russia? Speaking about Russia, that Putin has no other instruments, just only some harsh response from the side of Putin, but they attacked us and occupied our territory, the Crimean Republic, so Putin can start new violations. Information agency, news agency, Crimean News, Vishnevetsky Vasily. The question is, when I was listening to Serhiy, if the blockade of Crimea becomes a subject of trade on international arena, then if Putin agree that we would go on to some negotiations with the Minsk agreements, but you stop the blockade of Crimea. What do you think? Would this can delay the Crimean matter for several years? The requirements of those who block Crimea, they have nothing common with the Minsk agreements. They are very independent NGOs, and they will not agree to go from the roads where they block the movement if someone would comes to them and say go from here because we have some negotiations about the Minsk agreements. So we now calmly, or maybe not calmly, wait for the response from Putin. Any trade on these issues on the part of Putin will make harm inside of Russia. If such a trade agreement blockade instead of Minsk agreement, if this is possible, then Putin wouldn't go to this, wouldn't agree to this. And I don't think he would review his instruments and measures he used to apply in other situations. Ukrainian radio, Vera Silachuk, I have a non-ethical question, let's say. What about the political and other sanctions from Ukraine towards Russia? And do you think these sanctions should have some continuation in transportation sphere? And this, any sanctions are better than their lack. It is very surprising that Ukraine did not apply these sanctions earlier. And as concern Russian airspace, so Russians say that they will lose millions. Ukraine feels it very hard to demand sanctions to be applied on the side of Europe when Ukraine itself does not initiate any sanctions. So when Europe may say about withdrawal of sanctions, then Ukraine should protest against withdrawal. The next question, please. Roman Politech. What do you think about the proposal by Rifat Chubarov to establish at the territory of Kherson region some food hubs for people from the occupied territories to come to continental Ukraine and buy foodstuff in Kherson region? I think this is an interesting initiative, and this kind of initiative has already been expressed in theory. This could be important and interesting. For example, for Crimean citizens, it would be a good chance to compare the prices and to contact Ukrainian people to have another information from Ukrainian side. This caravans from Crimea, people coming for food to continental Ukraine, this would be a good thing. But the problem is that besides Ukrainian administrative border, there is also Russian border, and they don't allow for Ukrainian potatoes to come to Crimea. So full-fledged caravans would not be possible. This is the reverse side response to our blockade. I can't say what alternative could be, but I think that food caravans are impossible. So they can come to the territory of Ukraine and eat cheese parmesan here. Another question. Yemets Maria, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. There was a proposal about the electricity shutdowns. Whether this proposal is possible, and Russia may then blame Ukrainian government. Yes, this is other representatives can give you good answers. We can't. But I think that blackouts would be a good response, but this is a question not to us. I think this is an extreme measure on the part of the government, and maybe the government might just say that some defect happened and then repair this defect for a very long time. And one of our Ukrainian successes is that we are now not so dependent on Russian gas as it was before. Now we are not on this gas needle. When each government was forced to go and beg gas from Russia in Moscow. Now we are very partially partially dependent. You are right, of course, that Ukrainian government will feel very big shame if something would break and Crimea would have no electricity. Unfortunately, we should go now to the administration of president, where we will speak about new evil plans of blockade. We have a lot of other plans, but we can't tell you about them. You will soon hear about them from Russian news, I'm sure. And now I would like to congratulate all Muslims with Kurban Bayram holiday, and just to finalize, please, Serhiy, you are welcome. I would like to emphasize that Crimea would always be on the agenda of Ukrainian policy, and Ukrainian society will do everything that everyone remembers that Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Crimean blockade made Crimeans to quarrel between themselves, but I think we will reach consensus all together in future, and we can elaborate the common strategy. Thank you for your participation in this press conference, and I think the next week we will meet again, and we will be speaking about the international aspect of the Crimean blockade in